Okay, I think we're going to make a start. So welcome everybody. Welcome to all of our guests today, including our speakers for our webinar on active travel, which will see our new guidance document launched and some great presentations from colleagues at WHO, at KAA Ghent, and also from the UCI. This is the second of our webinars in our Leadership in Health and Wellbeing series. And really, we're going to be examining the potential of walking and cycling to get fans active, to reduce congestion and emissions as part of an integrated sustainable transport strategy. So a warm welcome to all of our speakers and participants. We're going to be spending 90 minutes today, and we're going to be having the following learning objectives from this webinar. We're going to be looking at the key health and sustainability benefits of active travel, how to work in partnership to integrate active travel into sustainability and mobility strategies, infrastructure planning and promotion of active travel to fans and also to venue workforces. We're going to be learning from established good practices, in particular our friends at KAA Ghent and their Cycling Buffaloes programme. And I think what we're trying to talk about really more than anything else is creating a culture of cycling and walking for all. And our friends at UCI will certainly talk a lot more about their ambitions for cycling for all. Just a bit of housekeeping, Zoom housekeeping. In terms of the presentations that you'll hear, we'll have 5 minutes at the end of each presentation that we will keep aside for questions. So please use the chat function any questions that you have to speakers, and we'll be able to field those. And then at the end of today's webinar, there'll be about 10 to 15 minutes that will be used for wider discussion just at the end of the session. So a bit of background to Healthy Stadia. We're a not-for-profit organisation working across the fields of sport, stadium operations and public health. And our primary aim is to reduce non-communicable disease prevalence, so NCD prevalence. We work with clubs, we work with venue operators and governing bodies of sport to develop stadia as health promoting settings. But in addition to that, we also use the power of sport to help fans and local communities make sustainable changes to their health behaviours. We have a long-term partnership with UEFA, and we work on many of their competitions to help deliver health programmes, in particular the Euro, both men's and women's Euro. We've designed a multifaceted programme for this year's Euro across those 11 host venues. And we have in-house expertise in physical activity, tobacco control, food and nutrition, and also around the wider determinants of health, in particular, the commercial determinants of health. So we work with researchers and practitioners to develop evidence-based guidance documents, training modules, and health interventions. So a brief overview of where we've come from and the type of work we do. So what does that look like in practice? Well, here are some key actions that we have developed to address non-communicable diseases. So the stadium-based policies and practices. So obviously active travel, which is what we're going to be discussing today, but also tobacco-free stadia and also healthier catering options as well. Some more community and fan-based health interventions. So perhaps our EuroFit program, which is a fan weight loss program, and also working on campaigns. So campaigns with a lot of UEFA's member associations to help support World Heart Day each year on the 29th of September. But we also support the EU Week of Sport and also the World No Tobacco Day, which will be held next Monday, 31st of May. So a quick overview of today's webinar. Well, we'll have World Health Organization following this introduction. They'll be setting the scene, talking about physical inactivity and also how active mobility can intervene on that. My colleague Michael Vigars will be launching our new guidance to help support venues and national associations in planning active travel to sports venues. Following that will be a case study from KAA Ghent on their Cycling Buffaloes programme. And then finally, a presentation on cycling for all from the UCI. And then that question and discussion section to follow. So I'm afraid that our colleagues at WHO are not able to present in person today. I think WHO have got a few things to attend to at the moment. So Dr. Stephen Whiting has prepared a presentation on video that is on active mobility and health. So we can just start that video.
Matthew, there doesn't appear to be any sound on the video.
There's no sound.
Now, if you just reshare the slides, there should be a tick box at the bottom left of the pop-up to share the sound.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael.
For overall physical activity promotion and achievement of the system. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Stephen Whiting, and I'm a technical officer at the WHO Regional Office for Europe, mostly working in the area of physical activity promotion. Very happy to be here today. Thank you for the invitation. I'm just going to give a brief introduction to the topic of active mobility and its importance for overall physical activity promotion and achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. But first we need to define physical activity. A common misconception is that it's only about sports and exercise, but it's actually an umbrella term and includes many different forms of movement and activities, from walking and gardening to Olympic weightlifting and swimming. So sports and exercise are just specific types of physical activity. But there are many other ways to be active. The definition of physical activity is any bodily movement produced by a skeletal muscle that requires energy expenditure. So it comprises diverse activities, whether we're at work, school, or doing household chores. And active mobility is a type of physical activity, also called active transportation or active travel. And it refers to traveling from one place to another in a physically active way that requires energy expenditure. Usually this is through walking or cycling. So the health benefits of physical activity are well established, include a lower risk of many non-communicable diseases, including cardiovascular disease, hypertension, diabetes, breast and colon cancer. It also has positive effects on mental health, can delay the onset of dementia, and can help with the maintenance of a healthy body weight and prevent obesity. Physical inactivity, on the other hand, is a leading risk factor for premature death worldwide. Many cases of cancer, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, many deaths each year are directly attributable to physical inactivity. There's also an economic burden. It's conservatively estimated that physical activity costs over 53 billion in healthcare costs and 13 billion in lost productivity each year. Last year, WHO developed updated evidence-based guidelines for the amount of physical activity children, adolescents, adults, and older adults should achieve to gain significant health benefits and reduce health risks. This is how we define and measure physical inactivity at the population level. So how much do we need? For adults, we recommend at least 150 minutes per week, including some muscle strengthening activities, and for older adults, some balance activities. For children and adolescents aged 5 to 17, we recommend an average of 60 minutes per day. We also now have guidelines for children aged 1 to 4. So these guidelines form the basis of our work at WHO to promote physical activity. Our aim is to ensure as many people as possible meet the recommended levels to protect their health. However, much of the world is becoming less active. As countries develop economically, physical activity levels tend to decrease. In some countries, the prevalence of inactivity is estimated to be as high as 70% of the population, mostly due to changing transport patterns, increased use of technology, and established cultural values and urbanization. So it is a global issue, both for men and women in all regions and in all countries. We also have data from the Eurobarometer survey that was conducted in EU member states in 2018. This map shows the proportion of each population that reported that they never exercise or play sport. You can see in the dark red countries, over 50% of respondents never exercised or played sport, and in all but two countries, it was over 30% of the population. Also from the same survey, a question was asked how often respondents engaged in other physical activity, such as cycling and walking. Again, in many countries, over 40% of people never engaged in cycling or walking. So based on these results, many people across the region are at risk from physical inactivity. We also have data from the WHO Childhood Obesity Surveillance Initiative, which collects national data on body mass index of children aged 6 to 9 and also risk factors for childhood obesity, including active transport, which is the graph shown here. So across the region, around 1 in 2 on average across the whole region were only actively traveling to school. But in a few countries, only 1 in 5 were actively traveling to school. So this depended on many factors, including culture, geography, and climate. So all of our work on physical activity is in line with the overarching WHO frameworks. The WHO Regional Office for Europe has had a regional strategy since 2016. And in 2018, WHO developed a global action plan in response to requests from countries for updated guidance and policy actions to increase physical activity at all levels. And the overall goal is to reduce levels of physical inactivity by 15% by 2030. So these are the 4 policy action areas outlined in the plan. And within each of these, there are specific recommended actions for WHO, member states, and other stakeholders. And increasing active mobility is relevant to all 4 of these areas. Increasing active mobility is also relevant to many of the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular SDG 3 on good health and well-being, but specifically 3.4, which aims to reduce non-communicable diseases. Increasing rates of walking and cycling through improving transport infrastructure can also contribute to the sustainability and preservation of the environment. Reducing car use and emissions will be important for climate action and sustainability of cities. So there are many linkages between the different goals, and active mobility will be essential if we are to achieve many of the SDGs. By 2030, more than 80% of Europeans will live in urban areas, so it's essential that environments in cities are conducive to being active. And just a few examples of the way this graph is from the Global Action Plan. These are some of the areas related to the Create Active Environments policy area. But things like developing connected cycling and walking paths are important, and ensuring that they are well maintained so that they're actually used. Improving road safety through traffic measures to reduce volume and speed of traffic in certain settings, especially around schools, but also stadiums, for example, can be important. And for cycling, providing infrastructure at destinations, so ensuring that there are places to secure bikes. And it's also important that our cities are designed in a way that there are local destinations, so mixed-use neighbourhoods where people have access to stores and businesses, schools, parks, and so we don't rely so much on travelling by private car. And then multimodal transport, which means connecting cycling and walking routes with public transport options can also increase active mobility and reduce car use. Finally, these are two examples of tools that WHO Europe has developed to support countries to develop projects to promote active mobility. The Health Economic Assessment Tool, or HEAT tool, can be used for several types of project assessments of new or existing projects, including estimating the cost-benefit ratio of the projects, which can be an important advocacy tool for policymakers. In addition, in partnership with the UN Economic Commission for Europe and other partners, the Pan-European Master Plan for Cycling Promotion has recently been developed just this month. One of the key objectives by 2030 is to double levels of cycling across the region as a whole by improving infrastructure, new national cycling policies, road safety measures, and integrating cycling with other health policies and transport planning. So that was just a quick overview to give you an idea of the importance of active mobility for health. Thank you to the European Healthy Stadia Network for the invitation to present, and we look forward to future collaboration with the network. Thank you all for listening, and all the best for the rest of the webinar. Thank you.
Well, that's a huge thanks to Stephen Whiting from WHO for that presentation. Unfortunately, obviously, Stephen's not going to be here to answer any questions, but if there is anything burning from our audience, then I'm sure I can forward any questions you have directly to him. So I'm going to hand over now to my colleague, Michael Biggards, and Michael is going to talk through our new active travel guidance. He's going to pick up on quite a number of the points that Stephen mentioned during his presentation, in particular how active mobility can intervene on sedentary behaviour, but obviously also lower CO2 levels and lower congestion. So Michael, it's over to you. You have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed, Matthew. Fantastic to have the WHO provide that presentation this morning, providing the public health rationale for increasing physical activity levels and indeed active travel as well. So I'll just start with a brief overview really of Healthy Stadia's involvement within the sporting sphere and what we kind of do as an organisation. So at the moment, we are UEFA's football and social responsibility partner for health and wellbeing, and we specialise in developing health-promoting sports events. Some of those events are listed on the right-hand side of your screen here. As part of our role within UEFA's portfolio, we work to assess the capacity for active travel for these tournaments and events here. And we do this by going in with their events teams, looking at things like cycle parking facilities, dedicated cycling, walking routes to certain stadia, and looking at how we can maximise provision for walking and cycling at these key events and tournaments. We've also been involved in a number of active travel projects with UEFA, perhaps the most significant of which was at the Women's Euro 2017 tournament in the Netherlands, where we designed and developed an app that actually incentivised walking and cycling to stadia. And I'll talk through that in a little bit more detail towards the end of my presentation. But of course, we also publish a range of support tools, including the guidance documentation that we're launching today, and a number of case studies that we've produced with partners such as Wim from KA Gent, in terms of how clubs are doing some pioneering work to promote walking and cycling. So why promote active travel to sports stadia? Well, I think our colleagues at WHO provided a good rationale in terms of the public health reasons to do so, but there are other reasons as well in terms of environmental and sustainability agenda. We need to look at how people navigate to sports stadia to help to reduce CO2 emissions, but also there's a logistical argument as well in terms of reducing private vehicles, accessing stadia, providing a lot of congestion, and other issues on that. So we'll start with the impact of road transport. And of course, as many of us on this webinar today will admit, we use private vehicles too much because they are comfortable and they are convenient. And this is especially true when we're traveling to places that may be unfamiliar, such as an away sports ground. You can imagine traveling to the other side of the country, not knowing where you're going, and of course, using a car is the easy choice. But of course, the more we use cars, the more air pollution there will be, particularly in inner city areas, due to high volumes and high density of private vehicles. And where there is high levels of congestion and high levels of road traffic, there will be heightened emissions. And of course, this puts fans at greater risk of adverse health outcomes associated with the inhalation of airborne pollutants. So I'd just like to start with an example here. And this is the Allianz Arena in Munich in Germany. A pretty fantastic stadium, seats 75,000 people, certainly pre-COVID at least. But this was built about 20 years ago now to facilitate the FIFA World Cup. It's hosted Champions League finals and is also going to host matches at Euro 2020 this summer. And this diagram you see on the screen here is part of their communications around accessing the stadium. You'll see there is the U-Bahn or the metro to the top of the screen, and also the motorway to the bottom and to the right. And these are two ways in which a lot of fans will access the stadiums. And of course, if people drive, they will need somewhere to park. And the area that is highlighted in pink on the screen here is actually Europe's largest multi-story car park. It houses 9,800 car parking spaces. And you can only begin to imagine the issues with congestion and air pollution produced by people accessing the stadium with their private vehicles. And in fact, this problem was anticipated by the architectural team and the engineering team of the Allianz Arena, because within this multi-story car park, they've actually implemented vents to allow some of those CO2 emissions and particulate matter to escape. Otherwise, fans would have been at severe risk of adverse health outcomes. So we know that air pollution and air quality is an issue, but of course, congestion immediately preceding and after events, as people try to leave after the final whistle, presents huge problems logistically and operationally for stadium operations teams in terms of managing traffic flow and car parking spaces. And high volumes of traffic is really frustrating for fans, but also residents that are local to Stadia. So it's really important that we consider not just fans in terms of accessing stadiums, but local communities as well. And limited car parking spaces, particularly in inner city areas, often lead to road closures, which can obviously impact residential areas and potentially sour community relations. I'll now provide another example. This is Anfield in Liverpool, a stadium very close to myself and both Matthew. It's an historic stadium. It's been on this site for over 100 years and is very much in a very tightly bound area with lots of housing in close proximity. And because the stadium has developed over time and now houses about 54,000 people on a match day, this presents a number of problems logistically. And the pink area here that is highlighted on the screen is actually closed to traffic up to 4 hours before a match, which obviously is to try and prevent fans from parking in residential areas. But of course, this causes further issues with parking outside of this area. So one thing that we would advocate for is for Liverpool to increase provision for walking and cycling to try and limit the amount of congestion on a match day. And indeed, Liverpool Football Club is doing some great work with a cycle hub just to the top of the screen there. I've also just included this slide here, which is probably fairly familiar to many of us within the public health sphere, but for those coming from a sports background, this is an image used to illustrate just how much space private vehicles use up. And compared to that of public transport in terms of buses and indeed cycles, we can quite quite significantly reduce the space needed to transport fans across cities. So at this point in time, we'd now like to launch our new active travel guidance, which updates our previous guidance from 2014. And hopefully this now provides a much more substantial rationale in terms of the public health, environmental and logistical rationales for promoting walking and cycling to Stadia. This details how to engage key stakeholders across the public, private and third sectors, most notably local government, but also local NGOs that can also help to promote your facilities and infrastructure. It advocates for the integration of active travel with public transport. And I'll talk through in a little bit more detail later on in terms of how that can be activated. This document also explores the infrastructure and communication tools needed to encourage fans to walk and cycle to Stadia. And there are also some brief monitoring and evaluation tools for sports events teams to consider to monitor how your stadium and indeed your active travel infrastructure is being used, and also how it can be improved. So we'll now move on to some practical considerations of how to develop your active travel strategy and increase provision for walking and cycling. And we'll start with possibly the most important piece in this entire document. It's about stakeholder engagement and consultation. Without engaging with your stakeholders, you will not know how different stakeholder groups are impacted by your current transportation strategy. So sports stadia and sports organisations should undertake a stakeholder mapping exercise to ensure that everyone who is affected is being consulted properly. It's really important to engage with both home and away fans because they will access the stadia in very different ways. And it's also important to engage in a user-friendly manner, remove any technical information, jargon, and make sure that there are plenty of maps and images to illustrate how you intend to boost walking, cycling infrastructure. Integration with public transport. This is a really key thing for sports stadia to consider because the further fans live from a sports stadia, the greater the likelihood that they will use a private vehicle. But, as mentioned by colleagues at WHO, stadia can promote what we call multimodal travel, which involves 2 or more types of transport in order to access a stadium. By its very nature, multimodal travel incorporates active components as people travel from a train station to a bus station or from a train station to the stadium. And in order to facilitate this, it's important for Stadia to consider working with local transport providers to allow fans to access national railways and local public transport for free with so-called combi tickets, or indeed with a discount, something to incentivize them to use public transport and to try active forms of mobility. There are other schemes that can be considered also in terms of bike and ride schemes where an individual can ride to a train station and then catch a train to the stadium. So lots of different things to consider in terms of integrating active travel with public transport. And of course, if anyone on this webinar today is a cyclist, they will tell you straight away that in order to facilitate cycling, you need safe places to park your bicycle. If there isn't enough bicycle parking facilities, people won't use them. And this may lead to things like people attaching their bicycles to street lighting or fences. And this can be dangerous to pedestrians and can also leave property vulnerable to theft and vandalism as well. So it's important that Stadia install cycle locking facilities and distribute them around their stadia so that fans, if they're sitting in the north stand or the south stand, have really easy access to where they're sitting within a stadium. And one perhaps slightly controversial solution to installing cycle locking facilities, if there is limited space at your stadium, is to perhaps considering replacing private vehicle parking spaces with cycle parking, because just one space for a car could provide space for 8 to 10 cycles. And on the screen here, we've just provided some examples of some pioneering work being done now across Europe. In the top left, we have Viola Park in Vienna. They have a new build stadium with approximately 200 cycle parking facilities on their footprint. In the top right, we have Leicester City and the King Power Stadium. They have a great program where they encourage their staff to cycle to the stadia, and these are the staff cycle locking facilities that you'll see are covered and also off the main road. In the bottom right, we have the Stadion Energia in Gdansk, Poland. Their stadium actually sits on a dedicated cycling route, and they have great provision in terms of cycle locking facilities that are used very frequently. And we also have a great case study with Stadion Energia as well that we can share with you after the webinar. And finally, in the bottom left, we have FC Twente in the Netherlands. They had, when I visited them back in 2017, approximately 1,000 cycle locking facilities within approximately a 200-meter footprint of the stadium. So some fantastic facilities already in Europe, and indeed our colleagues at KA Ghent will talk about their provision a little later on the webinar. And of course, if people are walking and cycling, they will need to navigate around an urban area. So it's important that there is appropriate signage for both pedestrians and cyclists to find their way around, both in terms of directional signage, but also perhaps time as well that it may take to navigate from A to B. It's important that this is in both English and the host nation's language as well, to make sure that for international events, everyone can access and use the signage easily. Also, maps in inner city areas can be really helpful for fans who may be sort of being a tourist for the day, so they can access other significant landmarks within the city area. And of course, in terms of promoting active travel, sports stadia and sports clubs have a variety of communication channels that they can take advantage of to promote their infrastructure. Often they will have websites, social media, newsletters, the opportunity upon purchase of match tickets, and indeed through mobile applications to communicate provision and facilities. So communication should include things like maps of different routes, the distances and time they take to traverse, what signs to look out for, location of cycle locking facilities, and also any hazards that users should be aware of, particularly if a route goes near to a main road, or in wintertime if there is likely to be icy conditions, etc., etc. So here's another example that was developed in 2019 by Roma Mobilita for the Six Nations Rugby World Cup. And this is a diagram that provides information about cycling routes, cycle parking facilities, but also where the main public transport hubs are as well. So this is providing a lot of information for fans on different ways in which they can access the Stadio Olimpico in Rome, whether it be foot or whether it be by bicycle. Some of the final considerations here. Stadium stewards and security are a really important resource of information for fans on a match day. Briefing stewards and security can provide a really helpful solution, an extra form of communication for fans who need to find where to park their bicycle, for instance. It's also important to work with partner organisations, particularly local government or municipalities and local transport providers, to develop an integrated collaborative approach to transportation to your stadia. There are also things like cycle to work schemes that I mentioned that Leicester City have ongoing, and also public hire schemes as well. So city bike schemes can be a really good way of boosting provision at relatively low cost. Within our guidance, we also have some more practical and technical tools to help clubs and stadia identify routes that may be suitable to encourage fans to walk and cycle. This model that we've developed here has been adapted from the UK Department for Transport and their document on local cycling and walking plans, technical guidance for local authorities. And effectively, we've provided some principles that stadium operations teams should seek to use to develop and assess routes from key public transport hubs and their stadia. So things about directness, the steepness of a route, also how well it connects to other walking and cycling routes, and also comfort. so how good the road surface may be. I mentioned monitoring and evaluation briefly. We have some tools within our guidance document on how to monitor and evaluate your active travel strategy and provision. So you may wish to collect data around levels of walking, cycling, the use of cycle locking facilities, and of course perceptions of safety. So there's lots of suggestions within our guidance document on how to go about collecting data and assessing this as well. Finally, we've also produced a very basic logic model or change of theory that is available in our guidance that will allow stadium operations teams to assess how they achieve certain objectives and how their activities, whether it be communication or improvements to infrastructure, can boost walking and cycling on a match day. Finally, I'd just like to speak briefly about this programme of work that we completed in the Netherlands around promoting active travel to stadium as part of the Women's Euro 2017 tournament. So we developed and piloted an app, a smartphone app that used GPS technology to track walking and cycling. This app provided mapping, route planning, and indeed information on cycle parking for fans, and collected individual and aggregated data around calories burned, CO2 emissions saved by walking and cycling. So this was a really good way of evidencing the benefits to both fans, but also as part of a broader CSR strategy in terms of achieving some of those sustainable development goals. And on this slide here, we've just got the results really from that pilot program in the Netherlands. We had almost 2,000 downloads, over 2,000 kilometers walking or cycling completed by fans, some 80,000 calories burned, and 255 kilograms of CO2 emissions saved by walking and cycling. So this was a very novel way of assessing the impact of promoting walking and cycling as part of a fairly major international sports tournament. A final slide on COVID-19 and implications for transport to sports stadia. Of course, as our economies begin to open up and we hopefully return to some semblance of normality, there may still be some apprehension within communities in terms of using shared space transportation. So buses, trains and trams. There may be some apprehension here, and therefore there may be also an opportunity to advocate for walking and cycling to sports stadia. So this is a specific point in time that I think all stadium operations teams should be looking to boost provision to sort of support fans return to stadiums in the most comfortable way possible. So many thanks indeed for listening to my presentation about our guidance. We will be providing a link to our guidance in the next 7 to 10 days to all attendees. So please do let us know if you have any questions about that, and we look forward to sending that to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. Fantastic. I'm just going to stop this now because I can see that we've had a couple of questions. So I'm going to go with a question from Robin Island. Robin says, there's some positive examples here. As someone who regularly uses bicycles as part of my travel routes to Stadia, I'm very frustrated that integrated transport solutions such as taking a bicycle or a train or a bus are often not available. Is there anything that clubs and indeed Healthy Stadia can do campaign for better solutions?
Well, that's a great question, Robin. And indeed, our guidance document is very much aimed at stadium operations teams. But of course, as we've mentioned, engaging with a broader array of stakeholders is really important. And we hope that perhaps colleagues from a more transportation background that may be with us on the webinar today may be able to help us out with that. I think there is definitely a need to engage with public transport providers to provide more combi tickets and opportunities for those wishing to cycle to move their bicycle onto the train, because I know there's some costs often available in place to sort of, it's a bit of a barrier if you like, but also you have to book on as well to a lot of trains with your bicycle in advance. So there needs to be some more flexible solutions moving forward.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks, Robin. We've also had more of a point made by Ross Adams. Really good point. Point will be around the security of cycle parking. Many people are understandably reluctant to park a bike that's vulnerable to theft, especially as a would-be thief knows the time that the owner is likely to return, providing them with a known window of opportunity. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Certainly from my point of view, this is to do with having secure cycle parking, and also to have the right level of stewarding and security in place to make sure that cycle parking is monitored. So that I think that there's a thing there around training. I think that there's a thing there possibly around CCTV as well, making sure that the cycle parking is in close proximity to the stadium. It's not kind of a long way off site, unsupervised. So I think a lot of this is really to do with getting the right sort of wider infrastructure and plans in place to make sure that there's not only cycle parking, but making sure that it is secure and monitored, and giving, I suppose, fans that reassurance that they can leave that bike and know that they're going to be coming back to it when they finish the match. So we're going to move on now, and I'm going to be handing over to our colleague Wim Bielet, and Wim is the foundation manager for KAA Ghent Foundation. And Wim is going to give us a presentation which is on their fabulous Cycling Buffaloes program. So Wim, if you want to come off mute, then it's over to you.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, good. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I am Wim from KAA Foundation, and I'm going to tell you the story about the Cycling Buffaloes. Ghent is a Belgian city of the north of the country of Flanders, a city of 260,000 people, with a beautiful historic city center, and also very important for this story with a bike tradition. We as a football club were founded in 1900, so we are an old football club already, and as a national team of in our national competition, we became Belgian champion in 2015, and we won the cup 3 times in a row. Matthew, maybe I have breaking news for you also. Today, the Pro League, Belgian Pro League, decided to make all the stadiums in Belgium smoke-free at the beginning of next season. Finally. We as a football club are today on the 61st spot in the UEFA ranking, and our major goals were reaching final 8 in UEFA Cup in 92, final 16 at the Champions League in 16, and final 16 in the Europa League 2017. To understand our story of the biking Buffaloes, I take you to our new home, the Hilamco Arena. It was opened in 2013, a capacity of 20,000 seats in the stadium. And this stadium is built near the city, about 6 kilometers of the historic city center. Before that, our home was the Jules Otten Stadion. Jules Otten Stadion was also not in the city center, but it was near to the city center. Before we opened the stadium, we did a survey, and in this survey, we estimated that 2,000 of our season tickets holders were living about 5 kilometers from the new city center. We had a kind of a lot of bikers going to the old stadium yet, but more important is that at the old stadium it was built on a crossroad of public transport, and this public transport wasn't available at the new stadium. So we had a little problem, because also the city of Ghent asked us not to have a lot of car spaces. We have for the public in this new football stadium about 2,000 parking spaces for cars, and that's why we believed as foundation that the bicycle would be one of the solutions to make the mobility around the stadium, to make it better. We estimated that we needed 1,600 bicycle stalls at the new football stadium. We came from the old stadium. There we had 10 bicycle stalls, and we asked 1,600. We thought we needed infrastructure and we needed communication to our supporters, to tell them that the bicycle would be the best way to reach a new football stadium, and of course infrastructure, because that makes it comfortable and safe for all the bicycle riders. We set up a communication plan together with the Ghent organization of bikers, and on social media we put it up pictures at different spots in the city to tell to our supporters, when you start from here, you can reach a new stadium in 25 minutes or in 11 minutes from the railway station, or for 16 minutes from the old football stadium. And especially we ask them, from anywhere in Ghent, you can reach the new football stadium within 25 minutes of cycling. And if you don't have a carpool parking ticket, so a ticket for one of the parking spaces for cars, you better do not come with a car, because nowhere in the neighborhood of the stadium there will be free car parking spaces. We also made a little movie with the mayor of Ghent. He was very popular at those times, and maybe you can see it, but for our organization, this was a YouTube hit, reaching more than 80,000 views. We never have had that again. And it was this guy who told them all, you have to come by bike to the new football stadium. If you use a parking space, or if you use some place which is not a parking space, I will give you a ticket. And I can assure you it worked. We also used all the other social media platforms in the early days of the new football stadium. We even every game day we did a weather forecast to tell the people it will not be raining today, so come by bike. We also, and we still have a Velo Buffalo Facebook group of the biking Buffaloes. With today more than 1,500 members. And of course, this is the way how people tell to each other, how do you go? I go by bike. Which route do you take? Which is the safest way to go to the football stadium? And this was all starting from some weeks before the opening of the football stadium. I told we estimated 1,600 bicycle places, and the developer of the stadium gave us 800 permanent stalls. 800, which was, of course, when you come from 10 in the old stadiums, which was already a lot. And the city believed in what we were doing, and they put 700 additional mobile stalls for this opening night of the football stadium in July 2013. It was a very beautiful evening, this opening night, with very good weather, and no one had expected what happened at that evening. Almost 3 hours before the opening, the 800 stalls of the bicycles were all full. And people, they came and they put it on every bicycle stall a bike. And when all these bicycle stalls were full, they just put their bikes everywhere around the football stadium. Together with the organization of Ghent Bikers, we counted all the bicycles around the football stadium on the opening night. And for a stadium filled by 19,000 supporters, we had 3,611 bicycles. And that was the moment that I arranged with the developer and the owners of the football stadium that 800 bicycle stalls were not enough. And finally, they believed me. Today, of course, before the COVID situation, together with all the stakeholders, we try to explain to people, please come by bike, we will do everything for you. You have safe bicycle stalls, we have everything in the football stadium to give you a comfortable evening when you come by bike. And this is one of the pictures in the city center on match day, all Buffalo supporters who are coming to the football stadium. Today, we still have an average of more than 2,000 supporters who are using the bicycle every game. Last 2 years, we have an average attendance of 18,500 people in the stadium, with an average of 2,000. Last time that we counted, we had 2,700 bicycles. So that's a lot. If you know that 19,000, maximum of 19,000 of our supporters are home supporters, we have more than 10% of the attendees coming by bike every game. The situation today is that we have all our bicycle stalls. We have 3,438 stalls today at the stadium. And on beautiful evenings, when the weather is fine, these places are full. 600 of these are mobile stalls who are placed additional to the permanent stalls in front of the football stadium. We have to do a lot of work because bicycle users, they put their bike everywhere. That's our main point of concern today. You can see on the map that not all of the bicycle facilities are in front of the stadium, but we know today that if you put them 100 meters away from the stadium, people don't use them. They just put their bike everywhere, but not in a stall when the stall is too far away. So that's a point of concern, and every game we have these leaflets that we give to people, and to beg them, please put your bicycle in a stall. We did a lot for you to have these stalls in the stadium, so please use them. What's very important is that today the bicycle became very important, and we have seen that in last years the local government, but also the Flemish regional government has invested a lot now on bicycle roads, also illumination of bicycle roads near the stadium to make it safe for the bike and for the biker. So we have gained our place in the stadium, and more than ever, everyone knows now that the bicycle is a solution for a mobility problem, but it also brings together a lot of people. We created the bicycle, the Buffalo bikers as a community, and a community that is very visible among the KA Gent supporters. So today, we are not only working with the club, with the bicycles organization of Ghent, but also with the local police, for instance, on awareness campaigns when winters is coming and the dark days are coming, to use lights, to use fluo, and those things. We work together with the police, because they also say that the cycling football supporters of KA Ghent are their best ambassadors they can have, and they are very visible every match day in the city and in the region. Voila, this was my presentation about the cycling buffaloes.
Wim, thank you so much. I've heard Wim give this presentation actually a number of times now, and it never ceases to amaze me the incredible achievements the European champions of active travel have managed to achieve. I mean, yeah, not just pioneers, absolute geniuses. So I'm just going to stop the sharing for a moment now, and I'm just going to see whether there's any questions. I certainly do have a question. So I'll kick off with that. If anyone has any questions for Wim after that incredible presentation in terms of how they've been able to achieve this, please pop it into the chat. From my side, clearly a lot of this is based upon partnership working. I realized that obviously you needed to move to a new stadium, but for you, who have been the key partners who have allowed you to achieve some of these great successes over the last years?
First of all, the believers of the bicycle organization of Ghent, who believed in the bicycle. I remember 1 year before the opening, when the city council was meeting in some kind of mobility commission, and there were a lot of questions raised by the mobility organization on match days, because the public transport was not there, the roads weren't all there, and we said we will have our supporters using the bicycle, and they laughed at us. They didn't believe us that this would be one of the solutions, and yeah, it was especially the biking organization who saw, of course, the opportunity also to do this, and with the social media platforms. This is why in this opening night there were so much. No one has seen before so many bicycles together in our city as on the opening night of the football stadium. And yeah, I don't know why, but also this first months of the opening, the weather was very, very good also. So that also helped a lot, because people always think it will rain every day, but it doesn't rain a lot if you see it on match days. So this helped us, the organization. And of course, when the public or the local authorities saw that this amount of bicycles, they immediately invested in new bicycle stands, permanent stalls, and this was of course very important, because the bicycle, the biker asks for safe and comfortable stalls.
Do you have any advice for perhaps a club or a stadium that's hoping to build a greater culture in terms of walking and cycling to their stadium, just around first steps? I mean, we've talked about partners now, but what might be the first steps that you might think of in terms of them starting their journey towards a more active mobility culture?
I think first of all, infrastructure. If you have safe roads, but also safe bicycle roads, safe walking roads, that's I think very important. And secondly is the mentality. If you can show to people that you just have 15 minutes to go with your bicycle, and you can put your bicycle in front of a football stadium, yeah, if they believe it and if they do it, yeah, they will never come again with their car, because it's very comfortable to come with your bicycle. It's more comfortable than to come with your car. Of course, not every football fan is able to come by bicycle. If you have to drive, for instance, 20, 30, 40 kilometers. But a lot of, for us in a city where a lot of our supporters are from the neighborhood, from 25 minutes with their bike, for them is the most easy way to come by bike. And it's something in the head of the people, I think. And once they are used to take the bike and to use the bike, they will use them every time again.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, a kind of cultural shift, I suppose, but those early impressions or something which I suppose have to be right for them to continue in terms of that type of mobility culture. So We're going to move on now, and thanks an awful lot for them for that presentation. We're going to move on now to our colleagues at the UCI. We're going to be hearing from our colleague Isabella Burzak from UCI. And Isabella is going to be talking to us about some guidance the UCI are going to be producing and launching, I think, next week, in particular around the topic of cycling for all. So, Isabella, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. So really delighted to be here to present the UCI Cycling for All program and also explain kind of what is the link with today's webinar. So if I So just to give you a quick, for those who don't know the UCI, so the UCI is the world governing body for cycling, founded in Paris in 1900, and we're based in Aigle here in Switzerland. And we actually are based around an international training center. So we have athletes that come and train in BMX, road, mountain bike. We have different training facilities, and it's part of our development goals in order to help developing countries create new athletes as well. When it comes to the UCI, maybe one thing to note is as part of our mission, it is to develop and promote cycling, and this in collaboration with our 197 national federations, but not only as a sport. So part of our goal is also to develop cycling as a healthy recreational activity, but also as a sustainable and accessible means of transport. So then that brings me to the Cycling for All program and what our main objectives are. So when it comes to the Cycling for All program, we always say we have four main objectives. So one is to promote cycling as an accessible form of transport that's also part of a healthy lifestyle, and working on trying to see how we can help elevate that message. So how we can keep promoting the use of the bicycle for transport. Part of that has to do then with the second goal, which is working with other groups and organizations around the world to promote cycling and to speak on behalf of one voice. So the idea here isn't necessarily to position the UCI as kind of the key promoter, but rather working together and seeing how we can help elevate work and studies and research that have been done by others in order to help reinforce the promotion of cycling. So it's helping kind of elevate that message from different parts of the world as well. Then, as I mentioned, we have 197 national federations. So the goal here is to make sure that we can support them and make sure that they also within their own countries promote cycling as a form of transport and as an everyday activity. So it's creating toolkits, creating guidance, creating recommendations and templates that they can then use within their own countries. And then finally, it's also making sure that we make that link between the sport and the transport side. So seeing how can we use our own events to promote cycling for transport. So how can we promote active mobility at events? How can we inspire younger generations to cycle? How can we use our riders actually to help promote messaging? So in terms of developing a future ambassadors program. So really making sure that the sport isn't seen in isolation, but rather as being complementary to cycling for transport. So to give you just a few examples of deliverables and what's been done. So in 2017, we launched our Cycling for All Manifesto, which is a quick kind of two-pager that explains what our ambitions are in terms of promoting cycling and kind of takes from the four objectives that I presented before. This is an accessible document on our website and one that we use kind of to give a quick overview of our objectives. Another program that we created was the UCI Bike City label. So it's a label that we give to cities and regions that host UCI events, but that also have very clear and sound plans to promote cycling amongst the population. So it's making sure that, again, we make that link between not only hosting a sporting event, but also making sure that there's a a big impact for the population. It's also making sure that we leave a wider legacy for cities and regions that host our events. And finally, in terms of a long-term vision, what we'd like to do is create a globally recognized network that really shows that the impact that the sport can make in terms of further accessibility, healthier populations, more active populations, and really making sure that that's accessible to all types of cyclists. Then what it's based on. So the Bike City label is based on two different pillars. So one, as I mentioned, is a sporting pillar. So it's hosting events. But then on the other hand, we also have kind of the soft pillar, which is making sure that all cities have a clear long-term strategy. They have funding and budgets. They have cycling infrastructures and plans to improve them. They also have clear plans to increase the use of cycling, road safety programs, mass participation events, offering child cycle training, and finally tools to measure progress and to be able to report on progress. Right now we have 18 cities and regions as part of the network. And the goal, as I mentioned, is to keep increasing that and really to increase also the kind of the global impact of the program. So now we're on 3 continents, and our goal in the long term would of course be to be on all 5. So looking at how we can support maybe smaller cities in order to become a UCI Bike City or UCI Bike region. But this is a network that we work with currently in order to promote best practice examples. Then in terms of our other projects we've launched, so when I mentioned promoting best practice amongst our national federations, we created 2 toolkits. So one was created in partnership with Bikeability in the UK, which is a toolkit which was developed to promote children's cycling education. So Bikeability helped us put together a toolkit on how to create a children's cycling education program, and not a toolkit on this is what you should be delivering. So it's really setting up the basis and the questions you should be asking before you set up a program. So how do you convince your local government? How do you bring on partners? How do you put together a program? What are elements of a program you should be considering? How do you measure and monitor? So this is part of this toolkit. And secondly, what we also did, actually very much based on the UCI Bike City examples, is a Cycling for All side events toolkit, which provides very practical guidance to organizers in terms of events they can host for the public as part of their cycling, let's say, sports events. So if you have an event happening, a world championship, what are types of activations you can put in place in order to get everyone cycling? So whether it's local children, whether it's fans, whether it's people traveling to your country and promoting bike tourism. So it's looking at what types of activities can be organized to promote cycling on a wider scale. Another tool which was developed actually by the Cycling Embassy of Denmark, and we collaborated with them on the launch of the tool, providing funding but also content, was the Cycling Danish Solutions website. So if you are looking for best practices on how to promote cycling coming from Denmark, this is a fantastic tool in that it provides you with very practical guidance with examples. It has 11 different categories of types of guidance. So whether it's creating infrastructures, whether it's getting kids on bikes, whether it's measurements and monitoring, they've broken it down to make it very easy to digest. So if you're interested, I would encourage you to look up the website, and it does give you examples too from the UCI, from our Bike City label, and just how that link can be made between sport and transport. And then finally, one of the other tools that we've developed is an annual conference, which we host normally around October. So it will take place in October this year. Hopefully the conditions will allow us to host it in Denmark, where we bring together different city representatives, different organizations. And the goal here is really to discuss cycling as a form of mobility and sharing best practices again. And also bringing together our different UCI Bike cities and regions for a series of workshops. So then it brings me to what will be our big announcement next week. So One of the key pillars we've been working on within the UCI is the development of a sustainability strategy as part of the work we've been doing with the UN and the IOC on the Sports for Climate Action framework. So to give you an update of kind of what's been done since 2020. So in April 2020, we announced that we had signed the UN Sports for Climate Action framework. So working with the UNFCCC and the IOC, and at the time, 120 different cycling organizations to promote kind of the responsibility that the sporting world has to be more sustainable. So then after that, we also joined the SLOCAT Partnership for Sustainable Low Carbon Transport. So again, a grouping of 90 different organizations that are promoting sustainable mobility. So then this February is kind of where we launched the next phase of our work. So we went to our management committee, which approved the guiding principles of our new sustainability strategy. So that strategy being based on 4 pillars. So one being the UCI's commitment to sustainability. So looking at how we can kind of bring our own house in order. Secondly, climate action and what the sporting world can do to take climate action. Thirdly, looking at the cycling of tomorrow and how can we ensure kind of the viable and sustainable growth of cycling. And finally, advocacy, and again, linking in with the Cycling for All program and the UN SDGs. So this created a framework that we've been working with for the past 6 months. And so next week on World Bicycle Day, we'll actually be okay, so yeah, so next week we'll be launching the next phase. So on the one hand, we'll be releasing our new sustainability guidelines. So guidelines that we've created for our national federations, our event organizers, teams, riders, and any other, I have here cycling stakeholder, but actually it can apply much more widely outside the cycling world as well. And it's to one kind of set a base in terms of what is sustainability, how it applies to cycling, why it's important for cycling and why the cycling world should take action. And within the guidelines, we have included a summary of the Healthy Stadia active travel guidance. So we've had fantastic collaboration with the team here and making sure that we can actually share best practice. So again, the goal here was not for the UCI to necessarily come up with all of this guidance, but rather share best practices that already exist, that have been proven, that have been fully developed. And so we're thrilled to be able to share the Healthy Stadia active travel guidance as part of our guidelines. And the second step of that launch next week will also be a more detailed version of the UCI sustainability targets. So again, based on the 4 key pillars, we'll be announcing what our key objectives and targets are for the next years and how we will be achieving them. So that will be part of next week's announcements. So that's the end of my presentation, but happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Isabella. That's fantastic. If anyone has any questions for Isabella, please share those through the chat. I certainly do. You mentioned monitoring tools as part of the second pillar. And I'm really interested to find out what types of tools that you are providing and the type of data that you're trying to capture as well.
So at the moment, we're not providing, that is actually part of our plan to strengthen that part in terms of being able to provide clear monitoring tools. For the moment, it's each city comes with kind of a list and a description of what they are monitoring. So whether it's bicycle counts, whether it's bicycle parking counts, and it's quite different, I would say, between the different cities. And this is where we've seen that we need to step up as well and be able to help them in terms of what types of things should be monitored, how to monitor, how to measure progress. And it's part of actually a strategy we have that will be implemented until next year to really strengthen the criteria and strengthen the progress monitoring, but also reporting from the Bike City label, because that's one of the areas that I'd say, haven't quite developed as well as we should have, where we would like to become much more clearly in terms of describing impacts, describing kind of what has the Bike City label done for cities, but also being able to very quantitatively show that and demonstrate it, and also make that link actually with the UN SDGs. So as part of this new sustainability strategy, we've also been working on a mapping tool when it comes to the UN SDGs. And that's something that will be developed by the end of the year, where we're really hoping to be able to map the impact of our own programs against the UN SDGs, but then also provide a template to our national federations, to our UCI bike cities, to help them also be able to report that way. So that's something in development, and really hoping that by kind of next year, we have something really in motion and really helping us provide more key data.
Absolutely, and I presume what the SDGs that you're predominantly working to, SDG 3 and possibly SDG 11 as well, is that what you're predominantly working towards?
We've actually mapped out 12 that are linked to what we do, and this is also from a stakeholder consultation process we did both internally and externally, and trying to see what different say actors within cycling identified as being relevant SDGs. So we did want to make it a bit wider, and so we do have kind of links to kind of a wide number of SDGs. And if not mistaken, the European Cyclist Federation did this work in, I think it was in 2016, where they developed a document which maps out the impact of cycling on the UN SDGs, and they had identified 11 at the time that were linked to cycling.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, we're going to open this out now, really just to a wider discussion over the last 10 minutes of the webinar. If anyone wants to speak or make a point, raise any questions with our speakers, we've got some great speakers today from both the governing body side of things and also implementation from clubs and stadium side. Use the raise hand function and I can bring you up and we can allow you just to speak or pop something in the chat. So please feel free to come forward on that. I'm going to kick off though, because I think us, one of the things that has been thinking about the pandemic actually over the last 15 months, but as a health organization, we have focused for quite a long time on health inequalities. And health inequalities are something that have been really brought into very sharp focus over the last 15 months by the pandemic. They have effectively been exposed as something which is really problematic in terms of outcomes related to COVID, but also the effect that they have on marginalized groups as well. And I'm just thinking about, we've talked quite a bit about kind of an inclusive culture today around physical activity, around cycling, around walking and the like. And yet there are certain barriers to entry, certain barriers to access in terms of certainly cycling, having the right equipment, the right kind of educative sort of process. So I think that I'm just interested to hear, perhaps in particular from Isabella, if anyone else wants to come in, the ways in which perhaps some of those barriers to entry might be overcome, whether it be through an process, whether it be through some sort of subsidy process, in terms of helping people to be able to cycle and helping to perhaps level out some of those health inequalities, in particular around physical activity. Because I think this is quite an acute point now. It's a real point of learning from the pandemic. So I don't know whether there's anyone who wants to respond on that particular question. Is there anything from your side, Isabella?
So we have, within our sustainability guidelines, we have included a chapter on diversity and inclusion, given that we are looking at the impact on the planet, but also on people, and making sure that cycling has a greater social impact. So in that, we did a bit of work with USA Cycling and British Cycling, which have developed programs to make sure that cycling is more inclusive, is more diverse. So we are sharing guidance that they've developed in terms of creating diversity champions, but also making the sport more inclusive. So that also will be included as part of the guidelines, but it's really opening up opportunities to making sure that these different the different groups are represented, but also have access to cycling. And even if it's within a sporting event, it's making sure that these different groups actually know the event is happening, but then also engaging with local nonprofit organizations that can make that link to increase opportunities. So that's one small part of a topic that we've only started looking into. There's lots more work to be done, and definitely one which we'll be working on in the coming months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was kind of thinking about this predominantly through the lens of deprivation and poverty, and economic disadvantage in terms of access. Michael, did you want to come in on this?
Yeah, thanks, Matthew, and thanks, Isabella, for those comments as well. And I guess from Healthy Stadia's perspective, working with stadiums and indeed communities that are often around, traditional inner city areas, many of these communities will be disadvantaged. There will be economically disadvantaged populations in and around stadia. So, there's an opportunity here to promote walking and cycling to those disadvantaged communities. Use the stadium as a point of interest for them to maybe first try cycling, or to walk around the city for the first time. I think there's an opportunity there. It's an interesting point around the barriers as well in terms of cycling in particular. Obviously bicycles can be expensive, but that's part of, again, a shift in culture towards repairing bicycles. And I know a lot of stadiums also have sort of workshops available for their fans to pump up their tires and check their brakes are working, etc. So there are things that clubs and stadia can do to sort of maintain bicycles as well, to help reduce costs.
Thanks for that, Michael. Ben, in your experience, have you as a foundation, or have your local cycling clubs, have you done anything specific in terms of encouraging marginalized groups or groups from higher areas of deprivation to be able to access cycles and to create that culture of cycling?
No, we haven't, Matthew. We played football with them. Yeah, so we have a lot of social sportive activities, but it's all about using football as a tool for integration, and we never have used the bicycle for a tool. Maybe because when you play football, you just need a ball and a field. When you do a project with bicycles, you need a lot of bicycles. I think that's the reason. But we also with an active fans program, I think then the bicycle is how do you see it? You need a bicycle to do this, and maybe that's not so easy, of course, because just when you go walking with people, you don't need anything to do this. So that's why we haven't used the bicycle.
Mm-hmm. Daniel, would you like to come up? I can put you in terms of question here. I know that you've asked to speak. So, Daniel, you have been unmuted. So just come up and take your questions to the panel. No. Well, Daniel's question, I'll ask it for him. He's put it in the chat. The question's about esports, a growing trend that we can't ignore. Popularity grew even more during the pandemic. Wondering if any of the panel are working with esport actors to take these key issues up with them, and what the outcomes might have been. So yeah, anyone who wants to go on that.
Yeah, I'll come in on that, Matthew. Thanks. Thanks very much for your question, Daniel. You're absolutely right. Esports is of growing interest, particularly among children and young people. And obviously, from a public health point of view, this has some potentially negative implications in terms of physical activity and indeed increases in sedentary behaviour. I think there is, a need to work with these populations, as perhaps as hinted at, in terms of working with private populations, providing them with opportunities to get physically active. Potentially, there's a way for clubs to engage with a growing audience around esports, because we know that a lot of clubs will have, an esports audience and perhaps even a nominated esports player. So there may be an opportunity there to leverage some positive messaging. How that translates into walking and cycling, I'm not quite sure, unless we're talking about the pelotons of the world, which are obviously incredibly expensive pieces of equipment to engage with. For sure, it's a growing concern from a public health point of view, particularly around how these esports are funded as well. But that's perhaps a different conversation for a different day.
Isabella, was there anything you wanted to come in on there?
Yes, definitely. Esports are a huge topic for the UCI. So I don't directly work on that topic at all. That's managed by our innovation manager, Michael Rogers. But as you may have seen with the recent launch of the Olympic virtual series, the cycling and UCI are part of that. And then also the UCI is in the process of developing a whole e-cycling strategy. So I guess for us, the difference is for e-cycling, you don't play with your thumbs, you actually cycle, you actually ride a bike, although stationary. So there is a whole whole strategy behind that. I, however, couldn't give you all the details just because it's led by our sports team, and I wouldn't want to share any wrong information.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, look, we're coming to the end of our time now, but I just wanted to recap. So quite a few things going on at the moment. We have World Biking Day next week on the 3rd of June, and there's going to be the launch of your sustainability strategy. Where can people find out a bit more about that, Isabella, on the day or thereafter?
So it will be available on our website, so uci.org, and also we'll be using all of our UCI social media channels as well to share information and to provide updates on that.
Fantastic. And we'll be directly mailing the new Healthy Stadia active travel guidelines for sports venues in the next 24 hours. We'll email that document to all of the participants, and it will be available for download from the Healthy Stadia website. That's www.healthystadia.eu. That'll be available by the end of this working week. So I'd like to thank all of our speakers today, to DOJ for joining us, to Michael for presenting the new guidelines from Healthy Stadia, to Wim for another incredible insight into the European champions of active travel, and of course to Isabella for her presentation on Cycling for All and the announcement of those new sustainability strategy guidelines from the UCI. If anyone has any questions that they want to pose offline, then please feel free to send those through to myself or Michael at the through the Healthy Stadia website. But many thanks to all of our participants for joining us today, and our speakers again. And bike and walk safely, and enjoy the summer of sport. Bye bye for now.